Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to our last set of papers. Next up is Woochan Kim talking about the mandatory bid rule.
Thank you. This is Woochan Kim from Korea University. Today, I'm not going to talk about corporate governance in Korea. Actually, I'm going to talk about corporate governance in Europe because I'm going to talk about mandatory bid rule originated from UK and adopted by many of the European countries and also some Asian countries. I think I will benefit a lot because you know more about mandatory bid rule than I do. Very preliminary work with my students. As you probably know, mandatory bid rule, it obligates the bidder to make a tender offer to the remaining shareholders if the bidder owns more than a threshold, like 30%, for example. And the dominant view in the finance literature is that it promotes equal treatment between the controlling shareholders and the minority shareholders. And also it deters any pressure to tender problem whenever there's a coercive bidding. And also at the same time, there's many theory papers arguing that it may hinder takeover activities. Efficient control transfers may not happen because of high acquisition cost. And basically, it's based on two facts. One is when you are subject to a mandatory bid rule, you have to pay the same control premium to the minority shareholders that you pay to the controlling shareholder, same very high price. And also, you need to make a tender offer to all the remaining minority shareholders, which would boost up the acquisition costs and hinder takeovers. But here in this study, what I want to do is give you an alternative view, arguing that mandatory bid rule may not necessarily increase acquisition costs and therefore not hinder takeover activities. This is based on two reasons. First of all, if there is a mandatory bid rule, if you're subject to it, any dollar increase in the control premium, any dollar increase in the offering price is going to increase the total acquisition cost more than the case when you did not have a mandatory bid rule. So you would probably negotiate much harder against your counterpart. And also, if that's the case, if that lowers the control premium, the offering price, then the offering price from the minority shareholders' point of view is going to be less attractive than the case when the control premium is high. So they may not all the shareholders may tender their shares, only a part of these shareholders may sell the shares to the bidder, which both may work in the same direction to reduce the acquisition costs. So overall, the acquisition costs may not be higher than the case when you did not have mandatory bid rule. So that's where I'm going at. So this one just shows you what I have just said using a diagram. The first diagram is the case when you don't have a mandatory bid rule. So here, there's a bidder trying to acquire shares from the block seller. The market price is $100. You overpay the premium. Control premium is 40%, which is why you're paying $140, but you only acquire like 40% of the shares and gain control. That's what it will happen if there's no mandatory bid rule. But say that you're now subject to the mandatory bid rule and you do not make any changes in your control premium, then what would happen is the acquisition cost is going to increase significantly. You buy all the shares. You may end up buying all the shares at a very high price. But my conjecture or argument is that the control premium is something that can change. And my argument is that the bidder may negotiate much harder because otherwise it's going to really boost up the acquisition costs. So they will try to make adjustment downward, down to maybe 120, offering 120 instead of 140. And that would reduce the acquisition cost, not only because of the lower price, but also the target firm shareholders may not all tender their shares. They may remain as a shareholder, hoping that this new bidder blockholder may not expropriate then much. So that's the argument I'm making. And also another argument that I can make is if the control premium is lower, and because control premium is very closely related to private benefits of control the bidder may extract after the acquisition, private benefits of control may also be lower. because you paid less, you can now afford to expropriate less. And also and it may be in it may be beneficial for the bidder to commit that you will not extract as much to induce the shareholders to remain as a shareholder. Just making a commitment that you will not expropriate, because this will also lower the acquisition cost, because the less they tender, the less will be the acquisition cost. So I think there is an incentive to do so, and that will lead to have these two hypotheses. One is, if you have a mandatory bid rule, it will lower the control premium, especially for those deals that are subject to the obligation, the ones that go above the rule triggering threshold, and also a similar hypothesis for the private benefits of control. That's the two sets of my hypothesis, but there can be a self-selection going on here, because whether to go beyond the threshold or not is a choice variable. You can deliberately go below that so that you do not get subject to the mandatory bid rule, right? So here on the left-hand side, I have a two-dimensional diagram. X-axis, the horizontal one, is a post-acquisition ownership. This is including any toehold plus the newly acquired shares, but it's not including the shares that you purchase from the minority shareholders. So this is something that you acquire after you own after the acquisition from the block seller. So in the absence of the mandatory bid rule, you could have evenly divided deals, a mixture of high control premium deals, low control premium deals on the left-hand side of the threshold and on the right-hand side of the threshold. But with the adoption of mandatory bid rule, what can happen is, because you're afraid that you may end up buying all the shares of the company, those deals that would have been above the threshold, especially those with high control premium, may try to move below the threshold. And if that's the case, what would happen is the finding that I will show you in a moment can be an artifact of self-selection. What I will show you in a moment is that the average control premium for those deals above the threshold is going to be lowered. But that can be an artifact of self-selection. Okay, so what I'm going to do next is go through these four hypotheses. If there is a self-selection, what's going to happen? I conduct four tests. One is there any bunching, sorting around the threshold? Would there be a high density just below the threshold and a lower density just above the threshold? Do I see that? And then what I want to do is whether this is just a local phenomena or a global phenomena. How do I do it? I try to investigate the average level of post-acquisition ownership. Would that be higher or lower than the case when mandatory bid rule did not exist? And also, I run a linear probability model and try to see whether the likelihood of being below the threshold increases once the mandatory bid rule has been adopted. And also, I just count the deals, the number of deals, whether the number of deals shrink after the adoption. For the deals above the threshold, would that be lower after the adoption of the mandatory bid rule? But here, what I do is, because the countries that I investigate, individual countries, they don't have many deals that meets the filtering rule that I have. So I focus on US and UK, where I have a significant number of deals. All right, so the data. So these are the countries that I'm using. So if I look into SCC Platinum during that time period, I found 47 countries with the mandatory bid rule. But however, I had to exclude many of the countries, and I ended up 41. Japan and Chile, the obligation to make a bid to all the remaining shareholders were triggered at a very high threshold. In Canada, before the nationwide adoption of mandatory bid rule, it was adopted by some individual provinces, and I don't know the jurisdiction of each of the deals. So because of data, I was not able to use Canada. In Australia, I think there's something called the creeping 3% rule, where even if you are above the threshold, you can keep on buying it every 6 months, 3% with a limit. And in New Zealand, there's an exception where you can make a tender offer below 50%. And China allows many of the exceptions, so I had to exclude those. So I ended up having only 41 countries. And this is a filtering rule. So I follow the existing literature that studies private benefit control. I focus on the privately negotiated deals, and I go through some additional filters, and then I end up having 697 transactions during that time period from 37 countries. So it's a fairly small number of sample. And one concern we have is actually the number of samples before the MBR adoption. So pre-MBR, I have only 76. Post-MBR, I have 622. Outcome variables. So I look at control premium and private benefit control. Here, private benefits control is just a normalized measure of control premium. And I measure these two outcome variables from the perspective of the acquirer, which is why I am subtracting the share price that would prevail after the acquirer has been known to the market. So you can see that I'm subtracting the post-acquisition, post-announcement share price for each of the outcome variables. But what I also do is I run a robustness check and subtract the share price that prevailed before the announcement. And I do get the very similar result. It's in the appendix of this slide, which means that the reduced control premium or the reduced private benefit control is not driven by a jump in the market price, but the offering price being lowered. So here's a result. This is Mantle bid rule and the control premium. You can see the bars on the left are the bars before the Mantle bid rule adoption. If you focus on the gray bars, they're very similar. Those are the control premiums for the deals that are below the threshold. Doesn't hardly change. The average premium is like 30%. But if you take a look at the deals above the threshold, it was pretty high, 60%, but it dropped significantly down to 23% for those countries that have adopted Mantle bid rule. If you look at the private benefits of control, which is a normalized measure, the level is much lower, but still you see a similar pattern. The private benefits control 15% for deals above the threshold before the MBR adoption goes all the way down to like 7.4%. Here's a regression result. So if you focus on the coefficient on the interaction term, it's negative 0.4 something, meaning that the control premium drops down by 40 percentage points on average. If you take a look at this another version, so this is again looking at the control premium, but I'm including here now the countries that has never adopted the Mantle bid rule. So the previous one, I'm including all the countries that have adopted Mantle bid rule at one point of time during my sample period. So you have this staggered adoption research design that may bias the coefficient. So what I do is I combine the data with the countries that has never adopted Mantle bid rule, which includes basically United States and Korea. And I do additional differencing here. And again, it's negative coefficient. The magnitude is pretty high. That's because of what happened in the non-adopting countries. The control premium actually increased for those deals above the threshold, which is why this is pretty large, the coefficient's large. And then I look at the private benefit control, similar setting, again, negative coefficient, magnitude is much smaller because it's normalized. And you do see a similar result for private benefits control as well. And then what I do is, having shown that, as I have told you, this could be an artifact of self-selection. So my first analysis is whether there's any bunching phenomena. So this is a distribution of post-acquisition ownership. Okay? It's not including the shares that you end up purchasing from the minority shareholder. This is the toehold plus the newly acquired shares from the block seller. Okay? You can see that there's a sorting going on after the Mantle bid rule has been adopted. You can see that the density is really high, just immediately below the threshold. And then it dropped significantly thereafter. That's the right-hand side. But if you look at the ones before the adoption, you don't see that. The distribution is fairly smooth. And as a placebo test, so this is the, let's see, yeah, this one. So this is the non-adopting countries, United States and Korea. I'm using the matching deals, and I do not see any discontinuity here, no obvious discontinuity. I do conduct a test, sort of a McCurry test, manipulation test, and again, on the right-hand side, you do see a clear discontinuity in the distribution. You don't see that on the left-hand side. And for the non-adopting countries, again, there's no discontinuity here. So it looks like there is some sorting going on in countries that have adopted mandatory bid-roll. But my next question is it something just local or is it global? So what I do is I run a regression where the outcome variable is post-acquisition ownership. And the coefficient on the interaction term is negative. So the average post-acquisition ownership is shrinking, but if you take a look at the last column, it's 0.033. That means on average, it shrinks by 3.3 percentage point. That's not really very high. So it does shrink, but not significantly in economic terms. And then I run the linear probability model, try to see whether the likelihood of going, making deals below the threshold, would that increase dramatically? And if you take a look, whether you use a full sample or just the adopting countries, the coefficient is negative but insignificant. So it doesn't seem like it's really hindering acquisition activities. And then lastly, I look at the deal frequency. Again, as I have told you, I'm comparing US and UK, the countries where I have more deals than other countries. And here, the difference between the number of deals between those above the threshold and below the threshold is more pronounced in the US than UK, interestingly. So if mandatory bid-roll hinders takeover activities, the difference would be larger in UK than US, but I see the opposite, which is going against the argument that mandatory bid-roll hinders acquisition. So this is just the regression version. The coefficient on the interaction term is positive. So in UK, the deals above the threshold is larger. The number is greater compared to the US, which is going against the idea that acquisition is hindered. So let me wrap up. The contribution is, this is the first empirical paper investigating whether mandatory bid-roll hinders acquisition activities. I have not found any other work on this. Most of the work in this area is theoretical, and if there is any empirical work, it's mostly about the control premium that was given to the block seller or any announcement effect when the EU adopted the directive, what happened to the target firm share price or the acquiring firm share price. I've not seen a paper that looks into the acquisition activities, and it has a policy implication, especially for Korea, which is one country that has not yet adopted mandatory bid-roll. It's considering to do so, but the policymakers in Korean government was very worried about the increase in the acquisition cost. So what they propose is, if you have an ownership above 25%, you don't have to make a tender offer to all the remaining shareholders of the target firm. You only need to buy 50% of the shares plus one share. The goal is to reduce the financial burden of the acquirers. But according to my finding in this study, you don't really have to worry about this because from what I see in other countries, it didn't really hinder acquisition activities. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for the invitation to this unique conference that brings governance issues from around the world. And I'm really pleased to be discussing this paper because for the last 2 months, I've been really concerned about thresholds of control and protection of minority shareholders. I'm leaving hostile takeover as a board member from BBVA, who is trying to acquire for 50.1% control of Sabadell Bank. And adding to that, so connecting with Dorothy's paper and the discussion that Martin had, We are as well seeing a common ownership issue here. So the big three are in both, are in BBVA and in Sabadell. We have as well hedge funds, and one of those hedge funds is sitting in the board of Sabadell. So, you know, these are kind of additional complex situations. So in the case of the mandatory bid rule, how does it play in action? So TSB is a digital bank in the UK. And in 2015, Sabadell decided to enter the UK market through the acquisition of this bank. And how do they do it? Well, they did a private negotiation behind the scenes with a few main block holders. And once they reached the 30% mandatory bid, the takeover was triggered, and Sabadell was ready to acquire the 100% of the ownership. So, you know, the bank had already considered that additional cost in the negotiation. Why is this rule in place? So the argument in favor the main argument is to protect minority shareholders from significant changes of control that are happening, and therefore that they didn't buy into that beforehand. So, you know, kind of being able to exit in new control configurations. As well, additional arguments have been, well, potentially it may prevent value-destroying transfers. You know, I've seen that as well as an argument in the literature, or encourage competitive bidding, meaning that potentially this could be a channel to drive up the price and the benefit for all shareholders. And I put these question marks because these are just arguments that have not been tested. And now with the data that the authors have, we can potentially test these additional arguments. On the against front, the arguments have been, okay, this is going to be costlier because now you have to pay a fair price to all. And secondly, it's going to constrain you because either you remain below the threshold or you have to be really prepared to be buying 100%. But, you know, I wonder, well, is it really that's the case, right? Because shareholders will have to tender. They have the option to sell their shares at a fair price, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to end at 100%. So that's as well an open question. What is control? So this started in the UK in '72, and they decided, it's a little bit ad hoc, but they decided, okay, this 30% is going to grant enough control to certain shareholders, even if they don't win all the voting, but that's, you know, that's giving them control over the corporation. And after that, there has been a staggered adoption across Europe between 25 and 50%. And surprisingly, you know, the US and South Korea do not have this rule. So it's kind of US, South Korea versus the rest of the world, converging to 30%. And I was wondering, okay, could I see some examples of minority shareholders, if that is the main argument? Could I see some examples of really minority shareholders being mistreated, not being given the right price in those geographies? And my search, you know, I looked into the media and different sources, and I was brought back to the UK, in fact. So in the UK in 2014, there was a new proposal in the UK to ensure that minority shareholders would vote, and here is a different case, but to delist corporations. And that was as a response to two main delisting cases that were really contentious. And the UK seems that, you know, the regulator wanted to to add this additional layer of control. However, when I was trying to see, why I don't find anything going on in the US? And thankfully yesterday during dinner, some of the lawyers in the House, said, well, because maybe there are alternative mechanisms in the US that are really working very well. And those are potentially the US courts that, they would not allow for a non-fair price to minority shareholders. Okay. So what is the objective of the paper? So the objective of the paper is to assess the impact of this rule for market control overall. So first, costs. Secondly, number of deals, and seeing whether this rule really diminishes the dynamism of takeovers. But as well, it could allow us to think of whether there are some unintended consequences of this rule. What are the main results of the paper? So the main results is that this this rule may reduce control premium by 45 percentage points and private benefits by 10 percentage points. These are fairly large effects. These results, the authors claim, that are not driven by selection. And this rule does not reduce the number of transactions that exceed the threshold. Okay. So given the data, the wealth of data that the authors have, it's really interesting to go back to this debate in the 80s, now with this staggered adoption over 2 decades. And it really can add a lot of nuance to this debate between protection of minority shareholders and efficiency of the market. Okay, but we have to be very mindful that the ownership structures between the US and Europe are extremely different, right? So in the US, we're going to have much more concentrated owners. We're going to have dual shares. We're going to have pyramidal as well structures. So comparing Europe, continental Europe, to the US can be a little bit tricky. So my comments are going to focus on these 4 points. I'm going to start to talk a little bit about the methods. And the authors are really interested in assessing the impact of this rule for the cost of an acquisition. And here I would encourage the author, well, the authors decide to measure control as the difference between the offer price and 2 days, the price 2 days after. I was a little bit surprised by this measure because to me, this is a measure of arbitrage spread rather than the cost of an acquisition. So I would say, well, why not use the premium paid, which is the offer price negotiated minus 1 day or 4 weeks, because if it's negotiated, for sure, there are going to be information leakages, and that could give a different dimension on the cost front. Other measures that have been widely used in the literature is the difference between the price for a share and the price for a block, or the differences between voting and non-voting. And here I'm referring to the Paramount saga that we are living in real time, right? And probably minority shareholders are really disappointed that this is not going through. And what we observe here is that voting shares have a 66% premium over non-voting shares. My second comment will pertain to the universe of the deals. And I think that what would be interesting is to understand, once you have these rules in place, how does this affect all sorts of deals, right? Those that are triggered by the rule versus those that are considered in legal terms voluntary. So, you just go for, let's say, 50.1% or 100, these are voluntary. There is no mandatory channel here, or even hostile takeovers. It could very well be the case that now that you have the rule, it is better to launch a hostile takeover than to do a negotiation. The paper uses many exceptions in the universe, and one of them that I'd like to understand better is this negative premium. It could be relevant for minority shareholders. If we understand that this negative premium proxies for firms maybe under distress, so you're buying at some sort of a discount, maybe as well those firms would be of interest to have in the sample. So I think I would be interested to really expand the universe of the study. Now going to this figure 3. So what this figure 3 shows us are the deals before those rules are adopted on the left-hand side, and then what happens to the deals after the rule is adopted. And we see that there is clearly bunching. So if there is bunching, if shareholders position themselves right below the threshold, that means that, hey, either there is some cost, that's before we saw that there's smoothness here, there's a lot of bunching. So I take this as a sign of cost, and as well, I'm wondering if the corporation observes that they have many shareholders below the threshold, that is a threat, right? Those guys are waiting for the right moment, potentially waiting for the right moment to jump that threshold and become acquirers. So I wonder with your data if this is possible to give clarity on that. And what's interesting as well is that there's no cases from 50 to 100. which, well, I mean, I thought that that was as well something interesting and worth understanding better. Now, the analysis, the authors, what they have decided is to compare countries that have adopted this rule versus the US and Korea that has not adopted this rule. And when they match deals between this country with the rule versus none, what I find problematic maybe is that in this pre-MBR match, there is here a discontinuity. And I think that we should have smoothness in both cases. So this to me looks a little bit problematic. So on the matching, I would say that it would be interesting precisely because of these differences between Europe and the US. It would be interesting to match based on prior ownership, prior concentration, and as well match on industry. So to compare deals, let's say in pharma in Europe versus deal in pharma in the US. But I know that, probably you don't have enough cases to do that. Just an idea. The paper uses a triple difference approach, and I think that for the reader, it would be easy if you would give an example of what exactly that means. It was very difficult for me to really visualize what are we comparing in this triple difference, which means that we have deals before and after, and above and below the threshold, and between countries that have adopted and countries that have not adopted. So at the end, I don't know exactly what type of deals I'm comparing. So maybe you could be more explicit on that. And as well, something that goes a little bit to the core of the methodology is that if the bid is triggered, if the rule applies, it's really an exogenous, it's an exogenous decision. So I wonder if this triple difference really solves for the lack of exogeneity in the triggering. My understanding is that it doesn't, that we still have. So what I would suggest is that, well, why not do the opposite route and embrace selection, yeah? And then, I would like to learn, well, do shareholders wait before the threshold? Once the MBR is triggered, the paid premium, is it really the next premium, is it really higher, much higher or lower than what it costs to be really below the threshold? I would like to understand if for the acquirer perspective, the idea that, if from an acquirer perspective, is it less value destroying because you can time it better? You are waiting below the threshold and then you can design the timing in a better fashion. And I'd like to know the ex post ownership when the MBR is triggered. Do they go to 100 or do they, stay between 50 and 100? That would be interesting. And reflecting on all of these issues, I was wondering, well, but who is really being protected by this rule? Yeah, is it really the minority shareholders that are being protected by this rule? Or this is the narrative in the UK in the 70s when this rule was adopted, because in the 60s, it was really the case that minority shareholders were being treated unfairly. And my sense is that it could be that the MBR rule is truly an anti-takeover provision by majority shareholders. That, highly concentrated owners in Europe really do not want other shareholders silently building stakes and then engaging in surprise M&As. Right? So I think that Swedish families have been very interested in having this rule precisely to protect themselves as controlling shareholders. So this could have been, thinking of it as an unintended consequence for this rule. So thinking a little bit about the mechanism, the authors mentioned that this rule could increase the bargaining power, and I'd like to understand better how do they gain this additional bargaining power by the fact of having this rule. Interesting why you choose a mandatory versus a voluntary route to acquire a company. And I think that at the end of the day, the results that the authors show are fairly strong, maybe too strong, and it would be very interesting to benchmark these results vis-a-vis other results in the M&A literature How does this compare to have this rule versus other things in the other M&A events? So I think that the paper maybe could benefit from thinking from a bigger perspective, less technical, and maybe discussing more the protection of minority shareholders or maybe the protection of majority shareholders. I think that having some real cases of minority shareholders being mistreated, or that could give a little bit more of flavor to what exactly is this rule trying to accomplish. So to conclude, the authors, they support that there is no trade-off between protection and efficiency. I'm not yet fully convinced. I think that there could be a few things that the authors could strengthen: the measure of cost, how to square the distributional bunching with this triple difference results, maybe decide not to stress too much the causal and do much more of a selection type of paper, which as well is very interesting, and as well bring some tension of the real problem that we have of potential mistreatment between majority shareholders and minority shareholders. This is all that I have. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for all the comments. There's a bunch. Let's see. So I think I addressed the issue of whether this is an arbitrage spread or not. So we had a discussion yesterday, actually. We had a pre-session. And it turns out that the shareholders, investors, actually can buy the target firm shares even after the announcement, even after the control transfer announcement, and then be eligible to sell their shares to the acquirer. That's something that I kind of figured out. So if you use the share price after the announcement, that share price is actually reflecting not only the presence of the new block holder, but also the fact that you can actually sell your shares at the offering price. So you're right, if you are using the share price after the announcement, that may reflect the arbitrage spread, which is why I think it's very important for us to do the robustness check and show that even if you use the share price that prevailed before the announcement, the results actually is there. And I just want to show you the result when I use the share price before the announcement. So where's the appendix? Yes. So this is the one using T-2, the share price that prevailed before the announcement. And you can see that the bar charts are basically the same. The control premium for the deals above the threshold shrinks a lot, maybe too lot, according to you. Private benefit control, same thing. And all the regression analysis tell the same. Another one, the universe of deals. Yes, I think this is a great idea. I only focus on the deals that are privately negotiated and then subsequently made an offer to the remaining target firm shareholders. But probably that's not the only deal that takes place. There could be a tender offer to all the shareholders, including the controlling shareholder. Maybe I should be investigating that as well. And also, as you have said, some hostile takeovers. And whether these bidders are just trying to initially take the ownership that's just below the threshold and just waiting for the time. Maybe that's something that I could also investigate. Why did I exclude all the deals with a negative premium? The reasoning was that I was interested in private benefits control, and if the new block holder wants to extract private benefits, they will probably not go after a company that may be distressed, where you purchase the firms with a negative premium. So that's the reason we dropped it, but I'll see if we can actually make something useful out of this sample as well. And another one, I think there was a question about the distribution. So here is the distribution right here. So this is, so I have 0 here. That's the threshold. So what I did is I subtracted the post-acquisition ownership with the respective country's threshold. Because they're all different, I had to kind of normalize it, which is why it doesn't go all the way to 100. So it could be that like the right tail, I have something like 70. That could be 100% if the threshold is 30%. And also, another question the discussant had was, if you take a look at this histogram on the left-hand side, it looks like there's some discontinuity here, which is why we run the manipulation test. And it shows that, well, not exactly, right? There is some discontinuity, but it's not really significantly different. The two distributions are kind of similar. And another one is, yes, your idea of embracing self-selection. I think that could be a better approach. So this is a preliminary work. So in the first part, I look at the impact on control premiums and private benefit control, which may be suffering from the identification problem. There is some, maybe not dramatic, but some selection going on. But so instead of focusing on that, maybe I should just go straight into the self-selection issue and see how the takeover dynamics change after the adoption of the mandatory bid rule. I think that's a good idea. Matching, yes, I was not able to match on industry, which is very important. Because I don't have many deals. In each of the countries, the deals may be in different industries. And so I was not able to really do matching on industry or ownership. Yes, triple differencing, very messy. Actually, I have a yes. So this is already triple differencing because the pre-MBR is a two-way interaction term. Post-MBR itself is a two-way interaction term. Multiplying a trigger is already a triple interaction. Here, this is actually doing additional differencing. So the interpretation is very hard because there are so many dimensions, right? So before and after, and also countries that have adopted it or not, and also whether you're above and below the threshold, and the years that you have adopted. So I will think about it, how to make this more easier to read, or just give more explicit explanation what the coefficient is all about. Let's see. Let's see. Broader question, some real examples of expropriation in countries where there's no mandatory bid rule. Probably in the US, there's an alternative mechanism protecting the minority shareholders. Maybe I should find some example in Korea. All right, so that's my responses to the discussion. Thank you very much. And I think I should take some questions from the floor.
Okay, terrific. So far I have Matteo and Umakan. If others have questions, please let me know.
Okay, so I appreciate that you're saying that in your sample, you're looking only at privately negotiated deals. And I think that you should stick to that, because the alternative is you're looking at companies where the mandatory bid was triggered by the acquirer buying the shares in the market and hitting the threshold. That happens for a different type of companies. That happens for contestable companies, versus the privately negotiated ones are typically companies with a controlling shareholders who wants to exit as the new guy, and the question is whether the new guy is good or bad, and there's the theoretical literature. I'm not sure that you're going to find a lot of cases where the mandatory bid is triggered because you are accumulating stock and all of a sudden you hit there. You will normally stop it before and then launch a voluntary bid. But careful again, because the expansion type of companies that you look into are contestable companies, where the dynamics of the premium formation are completely different than when you're negotiating an arm's length with a controlling shareholder in the shadow of whether a mandatory bid exists or not. And so, you may have a bunch of mixed signals there that are not like really comparable. One of the things, though, that you may want to do with your sample is to look at what was the actual control threshold, what was the control stake that passed? Because that has, if I'm buying from someone who's already has 60%, my liquidity concerns with a mandatory bid are smaller than if I'm buying from someone who controls the company with 35%, where I need to buy an extra 65% of the stock. So that might have big impact on how on how the premium and the overall acquisition costs are calculated.
Should you take additional questions?
We've got about 6 people.
I mean, yes, you go ahead with the, you can take more questions, I think.
Done.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to check if the study provides for the differences in the specific design features of the mandatory bid rules. So for example, you mentioned the trigger you have normalized because different countries could have different triggers. Some countries have partial offer requirements, others have full offer. Of course, you have excluded China and others which have a partial offer requirement. Some have kind of creeping acquisitions, others don't. Some have more exemptions, some have less. So to what extent does all of these differences also make in terms of behavior of deal makers?
Take those two, Woochan.
Okay, so yes, I understand that, yes, for the main purpose of this study, I should stick to the privately negotiated deals. But in addition to that, maybe it would pay off to take a look at some other deals as well. I'm not trying to mix the two. If I do it, I will do it separately. It could be in the same paper or not. And yes, I agree with you that the ones that acquire 60% and the ones that acquire 35%, the control premium and others could be very different. I will look into that. And the institutional differences across different countries, I was not able to look at all of that. I only looked at the different thresholds. I was not able to look at whether the country obligates partial tender offer or full tender offer. I will go through them, and if I do find some significant number of countries that have partial takeover and full tender offer, maybe I could do some tests regarding that dimension. I will look into some institutional differences and see whether there's any some pattern among the countries that I have. Thank you.
Rolf.
Thank you so much. Very interesting paper. I guess I should say that I'm the Director General of the Swedish Takeover Panel and has been for 30 years. So this is familiar territory. I deal with these issues on a daily basis. And I think maybe one should add to the story at the beginning in the UK with this being put in place in light of the very weak, at that time, very weak minority protection rules in the Companies Act in the UK. And the idea was not to hinder takeover activities, never been. The idea was to stop acquirers taking control without buying or offering to buy 100% of the shares. Now, to follow up on Matteo's comment, you don't see any mandatory bids. That's extremely infrequent, except for the situation that Mireia touched upon, when someone or a shareholder is slightly below in the territory of bunching and waiting to jump exactly when the market conditions are correct. There is no reason to buy 35% of the stock and being forced to make a mandatory bid. If you have the intention to go for 100%, you do it by a voluntary bid due to the fact that in a mandatory bid, you cannot have any conditions. While in a voluntary bid, you typically have a 90% acceptance condition and other conditions to fulfill the bid that you're not allowed to do or have in a mandatory bid. So that's why you not see them. You only see them again when someone jumps from 29 to more. On top of this, I think you should take into account the derogations from the mandatory bid. Almost weekly, we give dispensations or derogations to acquirers or that wants to acquire more than 30%. And some of them transactions that you see above 30% are probably due to the fact that they have been given a dispensation to do this. Due to specific circumstances, they are allowed to take a larger stake. Could be to rescue the company in financial distress or whatever. So it's a different story when you look at acquisitions above 30% or private deals above 30%. Well, that's a few comments. I have plenty more for you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes. So, yeah. So I will look into that. Actually, I have not investigated. I did not collect the data how the bidder acquires the remaining shares from the target for minority shareholders. I have not collected that. I should, I think, and then see whether what you have said is the one that is prevalent, right? So you purchase just immediately before, just below the threshold, and then try to make a tender offer for the remaining shares. I should actually document whether how prevalent that is and how rare it is for the bidder to just slightly go above the threshold, like buying 35%. I think that's consistent with what my discussant has told me, taking a more broader approach and see, giving more, facts, what happens to the country that has adopted mandatory bid rule. Yes, thank you for that. Yes.
Yes, my first question was actually about exceptions. So we already talked about this because we're not sure about the characteristics of the deal, if the deals above thresholds were actually deals subject to the mandatory bid rule. The second question I was wondering about power, because you have about like 700 deals, 30 years. 40 countries, right? And fixed effects for years and countries. So basically, is that a problem there, like overestimation of the, because you have a pretty big effect, huge, I would say.
I do agree that there is a power problem here. Especially for the period before the mandatory bid rule adoption. Some of the insignificant results that I do find here could be that it's not that the effect is not there, it's just that I don't have much power in my test. So I'm trying to think about how to increase the sample. I haven't come up with a great idea yet, but that's something that I'm trying to explore.
Thanks, Woochan. My comment really follows on from Umakamp's point about there being, different flavours of the mandatory bid rule in different countries. And you mentioned Australia. And one of the points in Australia that I've always found quite interesting is that it is different, or my understanding is it is different from the UK rule, because the UK rule allows an acquirer to enter into a private control transaction that crosses the threshold, so long as they then make, a bid to everyone else for the same price. That's not permitted under the Australian rule. Under the Australian rule, you are not allowed to cross the threshold unless you've first made that bid to all the shareholders. And so that then puts an acquirer at much greater risk of an auction starting because they can't stitch up control. And so that was must have been 15 years ago. That was a very big point in the business community because they said foreign investors are too afraid to make bids in Australia because they think they'll just start an auction. We need to go on the UK model where you can, stitch up control, but then just make sure the minority shareholders get the same price.
We have one more question for Georg.
Yeah, I just keep it brief. You've had lots of comments from lawyers in the room who've always told you the world is so different and complicated. One final point in that line is that there's of course always a big variety in ownership disclosure rules, right? And they may also have an impact on how easy you can do a takeover. So countries have very different disclosure thresholds. You know, some countries require you with every additional percentage point of ownership to disclose. Some other countries have very granular different rules, and that, of course, changes the costs of takeovers significantly, right? So it's basically a comment in the line of big variety, and maybe putting a question mark behind putting the mandatory bid rule as a one-size-fits-all point into the data set.
Yes, this is the issue we always have when we do a cross-country study. We do want to, consider all the differences, but at some stage we cannot. But I will look into some country differences. So am I done?
Okay, so yeah, we're exactly at time. So let's thank Woochan and Mireia.
Thank you.